the stick man, and I wanted to let me put this up here because of this is spirit. And the reason that I use this as spirit mind, because, and I realized when I said something about, if I say last week, I'm referring to our last gathering. When I say the mind, there's just one mind. I realize that's a contradiction in thinking, because everybody would automatically say, no, there's a carnal mind, and then there's the mind of Christ. And so I said, I would just come back to that and say, no, the mind represents stream, or just like wind represents air. So that if you realize there's just one air that moves over the earth. So I could say that's just one spirit that moves over the earth. So if I say mind like water, I think I heard one person say there are 38 different kinds of water. And I thought, wow, I know that my grandmother knew there were several types of water because there were several springs on their properties that produced different types of water. Like, for instance, one spring produced lime water, and grandmother would get water out of that spring to make pickles.
Huh.
Especially if she was making bread and butter pickles, or a pickle with a certain taste deal. She would use the lime water. And so I remember Connie and I moved up north in 85 north, north Indiana. I don't know, that's not considered north because they didn't, Indiana, the Hoosiers didn't see themselves as northerners, they seen themselves as Midwesterners, so that Indiana was the doorway to the Midwest. So anyway, when we moved up north to the Midwest, Indiana, the Hoosiers, they would see themselves differently. So people see themselves in a different light or a different caliber.
What's the Hoosier?
So Hoosiers, yeah, that's where we picked you up at, indirectly.
Is that a city?
Hoosier, that's the Indiana Hoosiers is the basketball team.
Huh.
So anybody from Indiana is known as a Hoosier.
What's the Hoosier?
Well, they said the Hoosiers was made up of Kentuckians that had come across the border, and because Kentucky speaks Southern, it was a slang to say, who's there?
Oh, cute.
So the Hoosier.
Okay.
Hoosier.
Well, how they get named.
Well, how they got that, I couldn't tell you. This is what they told me. They were made up of that. So spirit, when I talk about spirit or I talk about mind, and I said there's just one mind, and in that mind are all thoughts. Fish represent thoughts. So when you see the terminology, or you use, like if you use the Hebrew non, which is the glib 50, non, it deals with thoughts. So thoughts flow in one stream. So I say there's just one mind, that being the mind of God, and in that mind flows all kinds of thoughts. And you can say they're negative thoughts, or positive thoughts, or good thoughts, or bad thoughts. So you wouldn't attribute a bad thought to God, but if there's just a river that all fish flow in, you could say there are bottom fish that aren't really good for you, and there are other fish that are good for you. And I'm talking about from a physical perspective, to eat. You understand? So that's where I come up with that terminology. So if I'm talking about mind, or I'm talking about spirit, and if I'm looking at ancient material, then I'm going to read ancient material by the paradigm or the way I think. So if we are taught to think by a certain paradigm, we will look at things that way. For instance, one of the things I would like to tear down is the historicity of Scripture. It is not a history book. That's so hard for people to look at because they have been taught for hundreds of years that it's a history book. It's not a history book. It is a book of mysteries. And the mysteries are about how God, which is timeless, no thingness, becomes everything in time. So that's a paradox. That's a contradiction. And so, hard for us to think in a contradictory, paradoxical mind. But that's where my mind is at, out of years of study and research, that I can look at Scripture and I can realize that this contradiction is timelessness in time. And so that's how I could say that I am as God is. Well, I'd say, well, first off, God is timeless. So am I. But if I look at the limitlessness of my body, I'd say, well, my body is restricted to time. It is. My spirit is not. But the only reason my body is up and erect is because spirit is in it. If spirit leaves my body will decay and go right back into rot. Yours will. Everybody's does, okay? So these contradictions, these extremes are hard to reconcile, but they can be, and they are done through the instrument of the soul. And I say this so much, that the soul is a design of spirit for dimensions. And the reason I say that it is a design of spirit for dimensions is I'm saying or suggesting that there are other than 3 dimensions. So in the earth dimension, I'm looking in the earth dimension from a 3-dimensional perspective, which most people do. And so when I see something that's 4th dimensional, 5th dimensional, 6th dimensional, or 7th dimensional, then I usually say that's mystical. Don't I? No, and that's how we usually attach that phrase. Why? Because it's not limited to a 3-dimensional world. Well, to me, if we think like that, and obviously we are beginning not to think like that, but when we think like that, we limit ourselves to just a body thinking that this is it. This is all that there is. And we know that's not true, don't we? Well, at least we are coming to get to know that. So in Beverly's song, when she talks about heaven, when I see heaven, I'm not seeing a place out yonder of bliss. I'm actually seeing this aspect and this aspect sandwiched into one because of Shin Mem, Yod Mem. Those are the 4 Hebrew glyphs that spell the word heaven. Shin Mem, Mem being water, 40, always referring to materiality. Shin Mem, Yod Mem, for me, refers to these 2 pushed together as one. And so...
What does Shin Mem and Yod Mem look like?
Shin Mem in Hebrew looks, that's the Shin. This is the Mem. This is the glyph 40. This is the Mem 40. There are 2 Mems. There's the final Mem and then the Yod, which is 10. And then the final Mem is almost like a square box with a little squiggly on the top of it. It's 600. So that's the word for heaven. So when I take this particular word, this is 300, and I sandwich it together, I would say Shin Mem. What I would do when I say the Shin, I am thinking, number 300, I'm thinking of fire, because God is a consuming fire. You follow me? Fire in water. So I'm talking about material. I'm talking about material, physical, manifest body. You follow what I'm saying? Can you see this? This is what this is about. It's how to understand symbols. That's what I'm talking about. I've been teaching this on how to understand the symbolic. So Shin is fire and Mem is water. So fire and water is what makes a physical body be. Fire and water is spirit. Yod is this right here. It's the Aleph. That's the number 1 glyph. And then this Yod, which is number 10, it's marrying male and female.
So 10's the same as us 2?
This is the number for 10, the Yod, and this is the number for 1, the Aleph. So when you push these together, when you take the 0 and the 1, and you pull them together, and you get that, what you see is positive and negative. male and female. So anytime you take this glyph, and you'll see it a lot, I want to show it to you, you'll see it a lot, it's going to refer to the divine. The divine is timeless. The human is time. So when you take the timeless, that's God, Spirit, and you marry it to time, and that's what the Scripture as a mystery book is all about. And so the characters in there are about this merging, heaven and earth, the two that have become one, the two that's always been one. So I thank God for these songs that you guys are bringing forth, because I think we need these songs. And one of the reasons I say that, a song many times is a way to really embed something in your being. Have you ever had a song that's sort of like a ditty, and all of a sudden you just sing it over and over and over, and you can't get rid of it? So really what you're doing is you're writing that song within you, and it's a type of form of memory, right? Okay. Now, this book, I've had, just this past 2 weeks, I've had 4 people call me. I did a conference exactly a year ago, and in that conference I read some stuff from this book, which I read from this book quite often in conferences. And usually I don't necessarily always tell everybody what I'm reading, I just read this. What I read from this book a year ago was this phrase, and I'll read it to you. It says, "Now the ancients conceived of divine spirit as descending into matter through 3 1/2 kingdoms." And here is how I get that, 3 1/2 kingdoms. 1, 2, 3 1/2. So that when you read the book of Revelation, you will read about 3 1/2 constantly, but not about 7. You don't, it starts out with the introduction of the 7 churches, and then it talks about the 7 seals. But as far as the periods of time that it deals with 3 1/2 periods of time. Time, times, and a half time. Or it'll use, 1,260 days, which is exactly 3 1/2 years. So that's a number that's used constantly, 3 1/2. And to understand that, if you try to make that literal, and that's what they did, they took a passage out of the book of Daniel, which is not even in the Bible in a literal sense, to come up with a 7-year tribulation. And the way they come up with the 7-year tribulation, and fundamentalists is so divided on it. Some of them say that the church is taken out at the beginning of that 7-year period of time. Some of them say that it's taken out at the middle of that 7-year period of time, or in other words, after 1,260 days, 3 1/2 years. And some people say it's taken out at the end of that period of time. All of that is gross confusion over this concept. And that concept being the stick man. 7 days of creation, or the number 7, or understanding 3 1/2. So, either way, that's a lot. I hope you got that. The ancients conceived of divine spirit as descending into matter, divine spirit coming down. If anything failed in Genesis, not using the word fall as a mistake, but using the word fall as simply trying to understand descent, or something that's coming from where we would say is down. But you see, if the earth is a ball and it's coming, and we are supposedly, we're up here on this part and it's coming down, is it coming from this direction down if you're down here in southern Africa? So do you understand how we get so confused with these directions? So if I'm saying that something failed, like in Genesis 1:2, Genesis 2, something failed, really I'm talking about the Spirit's the only thing that failed. And what I mean is it descended, or it come down in perspective. I hope y'all got that. I hope you understand what I mean. So let me read this on here.
You mean shifting to like a lower state of mind, or actually descending physically,
State of
like
mind.
gravity?
State of mind.
Okay.
Yeah, it's gravity. If you take a globe, if gravity is pulling from out there here, which it is, it's constantly pulling. So it's pulling from what we would call up. So up would be relative to the position of gravity. Okay, so now the ancients conceived of the divine spirit as descending into matter through 3 1/2 kingdoms. The number 3 1/2 in the exact middle chapters 11 and 12 in the book of Revelation. Okay, reaching its nadir point. This is the nadir point. So it's saying it comes down to reach this point, and at this point it's taking all of this collectiveness, i.e. body, that's come up to this point, it's coming down to take all of this together to go right back up. So what God is doing is He's taking the collective life that you live, whatever you're doing, and you are sending it, metaphorically speaking, up. Spirit's coming down to collect what you've sent up, and it gets it to take it back, or to bring it back to a place of fertility. So it's only Spirit that fertilizes anything to make it grow or come alive. So if you have thoughts that are from your body lower nature, and you're constantly sending them up, Spirit's collecting those thoughts, and it's adding a divine miracle substance to it, which materializes those things. So that's why it tells you that the collective consciousness of your thinking will materialize your living. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why it says, as a man thinketh what?
So is it.
So he is.
Why? Because if he collectively thinks from his lower nature, I'm unworthy, I'm no good, he's constantly sending that up, and Spirit says, okay, if that's what you want me to produce for you, that's what I produce. So he constantly is living out his unworthiness. If he changes that and he realizes it's not got anything to do with my worthiness or my lack of being worthy, it's got to do with the mercy and the grace of God, of what God gives me. God gives me of the seed I sow. Did y'all see that movie? I mentioned that movie, The Free State of Jones.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they said in that movie was one of the laws that govern him, what a man plants in the earth is his. He gets to eat it. That is a divine principle of truth. So what you sow, you get to reap. That isn't karma. There's real confusion in what people call karma and the law of sowing and reaping. What you sow, you reap, simply because it's the law of sowing and reaping. What you plant grows. It's a real simple concept that we really complicate. Nevertheless, it says it reaches its nadir of full manifestation in the expression of the middle or the fourth kingdom, and then returning with its fruits of experience to its celestial home through the same 3 kingdoms in the reverse order.
Which biological process is this talking about?
Say that again.
Which biological process is this talking about?
He's just what I'm just talking about, the idea of thoughts that the Spirit collects.
Do you think that it's got a corresponding biological, like maybe like the circulation system, or how the Kundalini energy flows?
Well, Kundalini energy does flow basically off of thoughts, but it's a constant energy that's inside you. What he's referring to here, he's making a point about the nadir point, the 3 1/2 kingdom. He's talking about that connection of the soul. It's where the soul, it's like this. It's like the soul, much misunderstanding of the soul, the ego, and the senses. Now for me, I realize that this is not in everybody's school of thinking, but in my school of thinking, that's pretty much one and the same. In my school of thinking. So when I say the soul and the ego and the senses, I'm talking about basically the five physical senses with the 2 senses that aren't recognized. The sense of experience and the sense of intuition, which I collect those or combine those with the 5 to give you 7 senses. So that out of your experience you can learn tremendous things for positive or negative good. So does that, no? That
Yeah, helps. When you say nadir, is that like a place? Is that a palace?
That's a middle point. Middle point.
It's like how do you spell that?
Nadir. Yeah. let's see if I think I gave a definition. It's the point of the celestial sphere that is directly opposite the zenith and vertical downward flow from the observer, the lowest point.
Point of a celestial sphere?
Yeah, it's from up here, the divine, to the middle kingdom, 3.5. It's that point where it collects that and takes it back. Okay,
Thanks.
that's, and here I've started out to say this. I had this past week 4 calls from, 2 of those calls were as a result of that conference. It had been a year ago, and so people were thinking about it, and some of them wanted on the CD of the month list and had meant to do it, and they were reminded at this time about it and called me to get on the CD of the month list, and some of them were just reveling in the things that they had heard, and it was just such a challenge to them, and they had got this book, and they said, I can't hardly read that book. And I always try to say, if you're going to read this book, you get you a dictionary, because it's almost a must, because of the way he uses words. He uses big words, and so sometimes it is hard to read Alvin Boyd Kuhn. I love him. I really enjoy reading him, and he just resonates with me. So, and I had to kind of apologize to these folks because everybody doesn't get out of it, I guess, what I get out of it. But anyway.
So back to your nadir thing. When that go along with the scripture that Jesus was talking to somebody, you cannot ascend unless you first descend.
Yes.
So you're an ascended being. You descend, you go back up.
Yeah.
And you ascend.
He that descended is the same first that ascended, or he that ascended is the same that descended. And there again, it's back to that nadir point. So, hallelujah. Alvin Boyd Kuhn, who is the King of Glory? Really phenomenal read, and yes, difficult maybe in places to grasp. But let me read this to you. Let's see, where can I jump into it? Zeal to transform allegory into history. I used an analogy in our last meeting, and I said that you do not think of the Wizard of Oz as a historical event, do you? What if in 150 years from now, or even less than that, 100 years from now, someone begins to write, in other words, long enough period of time that everybody's dead, that Dorothy's dead, and all of them, except the witches, of course. And someone begins to write and starts to say that Dorothy was a goddess. She really lived. She was a real person. Do you think that when that writer begins to write that he would have controversy? Yes. Yes, a lot. If you go back and read the history of what happened from, say, 90 CE until 180 CE, almost 100 years of a story that was told and then was being tried to introduce that story as history, it wouldn't fit, and it didn't fit, and there was such upheaval. Now, of course, you realize the story I'm referring to is Jesus. I hope that's what you realize. The 4 Gospels that we have were not original eyewitness accounts like you have been told that they were. Matter of fact, the oldest gospel we have is not an original gospel. It only dates to somewhere in the late 3rd, middle 4th century. So we're talking about somewhere between 350 to possibly 450 years later. So if I said in 350 years they began to write and tell you that Dorothy was really real and she really did go to the Emerald City, and I began to write books to try to prove the historicity of that, I would have a difficult time doing that. It's just like when I said that I did not get to study what that movie proclaimed about the Free State of Jones. I had never heard of that until I seen that movie. But when I seen that movie, it resonated with me. Why would they leave a part of that part of our history out? And it comes back to this. Generally, the people who write history the way they want it to be heard, not the way it really was. And my analogy of that is this. If the American Indian were permitted to write the history of Columbus coming to America, would it be the way you and I have heard it? And your answer would be absolutely not. Why? They would write it differently. Would they say that this nation had been discovered? Or would they say, we've been here for thousands of years? They would have said, we've been here for thousands of years and we've lived in peace and we've lived in harmony, both with each other and with the land. But what happens when we come over here, as Europeans, so to speak, or from all over the world, we come over here and drive them out. So history is sometimes many, if not every time, is very tainted. Either way. Zeal to transform allegory into history was not daunted even by the incredible difficulties of changing mythical personages into real human figures. Thus, Sut Typhon, or Skiva, the crocodile-headed divinity type of the power of nature buried in the atom. Can you hear that? I wish people could hear that. I would love for people to hear that, to realize what's buried inside you and to understand that there is a positive, negative energy in the atom. The atom couldn't do and wouldn't do what it does if it didn't have positive, negative moving in it, nor would you. And understanding that the negative energy many times is the Hebrew glyph Satan. Not wrong, not bad, but that stands against. And that's what it is. It's a grounding. It's like the earth is considered carbon base. And the reason, and I'll show you that in this glyph right here. Many times to understand this glyph, and this is the glyph of the symbol of a human body, but we haven't associated that way. Religion has associated this glyph with a character. And that character actually was Jesus. They associate this glyph with Jesus. And that's correct if you're associating Jesus with the terminology that's used in the Gospels. He says he is the Son of Man, because that's what this glyph is about. It's about man. Or it's about, as it says in the movie The Free State of Jones, a man is a man, irregardless of his color of skin. In other words, a human is a human. Doesn't have anything to do with skin color to give him quality of life. He's a human being, period, male or female. So, I mean, I feel a passion about this kind of stuff simply because I get excited when I see that put out there on the screen before millions and millions of people. I think, wow, hopefully people are looking and thinking. To me, that's a part of what the movie industry is about, to provoke us to think. Yeah. And thank you for telling me about Hillary's America. My goodness. You talking about an awakening. You talking about, my prayer is that everybody in America would watch that movie, and not just the movie, take the time, 2 more hours, to watch the trailers.
What are you talking about?
Woo! Hillary's America. It's in the red box.
It doesn't sound like a good thing.
Huh?
It doesn't sound like a good thing.
Oh my God, it's a scary thing. It's the total scary thing. And it's based off documents. It's documented. And you know, I would have to say that again, when I seen it, my prayer was to the people who had anything to do with it, give them protection and safety. From what?
Yeah.
From a system that we have been seduced under, that's corrupt to the max. It doesn't give a flip about you and me. Doesn't care about our young men and women. doesn't think twice about entering into war with any nation. Part of it is for population control. Kill them out. That's a legal way to kill everybody. Or kill whoever they can kill. Wow. Well, anyhow, these SUT, SUT-TYPHON, SUT Typhon, you can hear, if you listen, Satan. You can hear that. And how it's used in the ancient Hebrew, it's used in the ancient Hebrew as an antihistamine. That which stands against anything contrary to the health and well-being of your physical body. Therefore, if your body does not have an immune system or an antihistamine standing against all of the things that's constantly coming at you, and there are, then you and I would just wither up and die. See? So this is what these mythologies were about. They weren't about real characters. There is no real character that lived 5,000 years ago that had an alligator head and a physical body like a man. That is a mythology. It's a fabulous story trying to combine stories and tales. So let me read the rest of it. The crocodile-headed divinity, type of the power of nature buried in an atom. The energies of life submerged in water, the symbol of matter, was converted into Satan, a personal devil. It goes on and on and on. Okay, just lay that over there. I get reading that, I get all lathered up. The misunderstanding of allegories and symbols is the greatest tragedy ever inflicted on the human race. By Lynn Hayes. I'll say that again. The misunderstanding of allegory. Misunderstanding of allegory. I'll shake this book at you, bless God. The Holy Bible. This is an allegorical, mythological, symbolic book, and it tells you that all the way through it, and why in the world we would let them make a history book out of it. It blows my mind. So again, I will say this, Lynn Hayes, i.e. me, the misunderstanding of allegory and symbol is the greatest tragedy ever inflicted on the human race. And I want to read you a statement from this guy right here, Stephen Mailer. If you don't have that book, we'll do you good to read this book. It's From Light into Darkness, Stephen Mailer. You can also Google him. He's on YouTube. He, along with several other people, Christopher Dunn, are bringing out the actual usages of the pyramids. What they were designed for was they were designed as energy containers that kept the earth in a peaceful state. Everything about them, they're all over the world. They're not just in Egypt. They're everywhere, and they're being found everywhere. They found 3 off the corner of North-South America, Northwest South America, under the water about 80 feet. They found 3 that they have uncovered. They're doing a lot of research. You don't see a whole lot about it, but nevertheless, they found them there. Could have been part of the city of Atlantis. Who knows? But they're there. You think somebody built these precise structures 80 feet under the water? No. No, they find them everywhere because they are energy structures. It's just like Tesla that understood the idea of free energy. God is constantly wanting us to realize we are an energetic being.
Papa, I was watching this documentary on Netflix about the pyramids, and they actually talked about how the structure of them, like under the pyramids, there's like different passageways for like water and stuff.
Exactly. They were water channels.
That's how Tesla did his free energy.
Google Christopher Dunn on YouTube. Watch him. Just Google him and watch him. This guy here too. Christopher Dunn and Stephen Mailer, they do tours to Egypt and South America, to Pumapuca, and teach some things that need to be taught. These things are coming out. Hallelujah. It just tickles me good. I'm sure most of you have heard of Fred Alan Wolf, he's a quantum scientist, but here's something that, let me just read you something that he quotes. This is Stephen Mailer quoting something from Fred Alan Wolf, and then Stephen Mailer makes an addendum to that. Fred Alan Wolf. According to Wolf definition, spirituality is the practice or the study of the vibrations of nothing. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Spirituality, spirit, unseen, can't see it, but it's alive and it's everywhere. It's another word for God. It's probably a better word for God, because when you say God, automatically you reduce what is to something you think. And according to the Tao, when you do that, then it's no longer what is, now it's what you think. And it's hard to do that. So listen to what he said. He said, spirituality is the practice or the study of vibrations of nothing. And then Mailer says, a clear paradox that opposes common sense. It does, if your common sense gets in the way. But if you open yourself up to a paradox, you begin to realize just about everything that is truth is a paradox. It's neither one or the other. In most cases, it's both and. That's hard. That's difficult. Now, religion, defined as a system that binds together or back to God, has been responsible for more divisive thinking and actions among human beings than any other system. Again, a paradox. Stephen Mailer. The history of almost all religions in the past 5,000 years, especially Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and I would say right here, addendum to Lynn Hayes, he really can't even go back 5,000 years to talk about Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. He's just really stretching it to go a little bit over 2,000 years, because you really can't hardly go back further than 300 BC to find Judaism or Hebrew or whatever. The history of all religions in the past 5,000 years, and especially that of Judaism, Christianity, it has been that of, this is a fact, this is a truth, have been that of wars, violence, torture, intolerance, ignorance, prejudice, racism, sexism, cruelty, hardly the evidence of a system designed to bind people together or to bind them to God. Which I'll say, yay, that's a good book if you want a real good book. Now go with me, if you have your Bible, go with me to Galatians chapter 4. I quote this a lot, but so that you can just see it, if you want to see it in your Bible. I'm meddling a lot this morning, I guess. I don't know why. Or preaching or whatever. Galatians chapter 4 and verse 24. And he's here, well, back to verse 21. Let's just read it. You all know this. Tell me, you that desire to be under the law, do you hear the law? It is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by a bondwoman, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh, but of the free woman by a promise. Which things are an allegory? Well, all 3 of the religions that Stephen Mailer just mentioned, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are based on this story and this character, period. And notice what he says about this story and these characters. Verse 24, which things are an allegory. Which things are an allegory. That means they're not a history. You could say it this way, they're not the historical account of a literal person or personages. They're not. They're an allegory. As an allegory, what does that mean? That means they are a fabulous story. And here again, it goes back to something that just really burns within my heart, and that is learning to be a fabulous storyteller. Learning to be a fabulous storyteller is what the ancients was all about. They were about telling stories in such a way, and when you do that, when you tell a story with such a way that it has intent, the reason it has intent is because it has real content. And what it does, it ignites something inside you that's already there. It's like flipping the switch on to that that's already resident in your heart. And many times, if it's told right, you feel it, you hear it, you sense it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes I get that so much, I just want to shake or jump or it's just so good in me, at least it's that way. So the parable, let me read you this real quickly, or not read it to you. I want you to, before I read this book, I want you to go with me to a couple of passages. You're in your New Testament, go with me to Matthew. Just real quickly, Matthew. This is, let's see, Matthew chapter, look at chapter 13. Yeah. Matthew chapter 13. This is, I think this is the first time this particular Greek word is used. And it's parabole. That's the Greek word, parabole. But I want you to see how it's used here. Verse 18, Matthew 13:18 says, "Hear ye therefore the parable of the sower." Parabole. And the Greek word parabole just simply means a proverb or a likeness in nature. So what does that mean? A proverb or a likeness in nature. It's where I begin to look at nature and tell you a story. When I'm looking at nature, I'm not just looking at the animal kingdom. I'm not just looking at the plant kingdom. I'm not just looking at the human kingdom. I'm not just looking at the fowl kingdom. I'm not just looking at the fish kingdom. I'm also looking at the kingdoms that causes all of those to be, which would be the sun, the moon, and the stars. So if I'm looking at, and I realize that this is what a parable is, it's what was called perennial philosophy or nature wisdom. Everything you read in the ancients, i.e. the Bible, is based in perennial philosophy.
So a parable has got to do with nature, and allegory has got to do a spiritual meaning with people.
Generally speaking, yes. Generally speaking, allegories will usually incorporate what we would call a human entity. But if I incorporated Dorothy as a human entity, in 100 years from now, somebody will write a story and say she was a real person. And you realize how foolish that is. You really do. And you don't have any problems. Oh, no, you don't now. What are we going to do 100 years from now when they try to tell us that story? And write it in a book and say, this is history. This is not a history book. This is a mystery book. And these mysteries are hid. These mysteries are hid in allegories, in parables, and symbols. And it's not just, what's the word I'm looking for? It's more than important. It's more than necessary. I mean, it is a must that we can understand it. And I'm going back 35, 40, almost 40 years to my teacher, Dr. Fuchsia Pickett. You've heard me say her name, mention her a lot. She was a very important person in my life. She said, Lynn, if you do not understand symbols, if you can't read signs, you will never understand the Bible. I thank God that she said it. I thank God she took the time to drive that deep inside me. And she did, and so I began to realize it doesn't matter if it's a glyph or if it's a number, if it's a river or if it's a mountain, if it's a human, whatever it is, it's a symbol. It's an allegory. It is a story about something that's inside me. And for me, so here Jesus, I want you to see what it says here. Verse 18, Hear ye therefore the parable of the sower. Look, drop down to verse 34. It says, all these things spake Jesus unto the multitude, how? In parables. So I can take you from right here, chapter 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and Jesus begins to talk about parables. And he talks about Job, And he says that's a parable, that's an allegory, that's a symbolic story. He talks about other characters. Why is it that the message of Jesus, as profound and as powerful as it is, not one time ever, not the first time, not any time, nowhere in the four Gospels will you find where Jesus said Adam made a mistake, Adam sinned, and because of that the whole human race is sinners. Jesus never said that. It's not there. If that's the reason that he came, if he came to save sinners from themselves, why wouldn't he say something about it? Why wouldn't he say, here's my purpose for being? Never did. Not one time. Challenge you. Find it. Anywhere in the four. You will not. You will not. Because, and one reason you won't, because it's not there. Plain not there. So, whew. Let's see. You found that in Matthew. Now I want you to go with me to John. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Go over to the John chapter 4. And these are just a few witnesses to these that's strong all through here, especially in the New Testament, as we think of it and know of it. John chapter 4. And look at verse 48. It says, Then said Jesus unto them, Except you see signs and wonders. Now how he's using this particular word signs right here, semanio. Semanio in Greek means a symbol. The book of Revelations, the first verse of the first chapter says very clearly that everything that you're reading in the book of Revelation is based in semanio. It's based in signs and symbols. And if we don't know how to read the signs and symbols, I say this a dozen of times over and over, if you get to a sign over here on I-75 going south that says 400 miles to Daytona and you stop there thinking you're in Daytona, you misread the sign, right? You ain't in Daytona. I hate to tell you, you're not there. That's just a pointer. That's a pointer. Now go with me to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1 and look at verse 14. Genesis 1:14 says, And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be what?
Signs.
For signs. Here again we have this word. This word is constantly used in the Hebrew. This word is oth. And the word oth actually just simply means a mark or a signal. And what the Hebrew scriptures are beginning to let us know is that everything basically is symbolically marking or sending us signals, if we can learn to read the signals. Now, I'm just cutting across a lot of stuff to get here to where I need to go because I'm running out of time. Go with me to Exodus chapter 3. Goes here with a conversation that I had with a gentleman several years ago who got a monthly CD and asked me some questions. And it was the questions based off of this passage of Scripture, Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. And all of you are familiar with this verse. I know you are. It's a profound verse.
In my Bible, that is capitalized big.
Is it really? Well, it's probably, this is a summa bonum. This is the root of it right here. And God said unto Moses, verse 14, God said, let's see, how does that spell? That's the word for God. Elohim. Used 32 times in Genesis chapter 1. It should have been translated this way. Should have had an S on it. And it's actually referring to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. Right here. 4, 5, 6, 7. There you go. It's actually referring to these 7 planetary spheres from Aries to Libra. That's what when it talks about the gods, this is what it's referring to. And these are signs and symbols. A lack of understanding this symbol, this is one of the most important symbols you'll see in any mythology. And it is in every mythology. It doesn't matter where you go, that is in every mythology. It's called the cardinal cross or the grand cross. It's in everything. And the reason it's in everything is simply because it's talking about the above, it's talking about the below. It's talking about heaven, it's talking about earth. It's talking about spirit, it's talking about matter. It's talking about above, it's talking about below. It's talking about timeless, it's talking about time. It's talking about non-matter, it's talking about matter. I mean, it's everywhere, it's in everything. Misunderstanding of these things, because they are symbols, they are glyphs, they are allegories, they are mythologies. Misunderstanding these things and trying to interpret them in light of history is where our gross error is at and what causes so much confusion. Okay, so it says right here, and God said to Moses, I am that. And then they added, I am. I am that. And what that says in Hebrew, let me write this for you in Hebrew. I need my big board right here, because I like to keep all this up here, but you have this. Just so that you can see it good. Aleph. Hey, this is number 1, number 5, Yod, number 10, and number 5. Okay? Aleph Hey, Yod Hey. I am that. Here is what that everybody is taught that it says. There's very little difference in this. Everybody's taught that it says this. Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. Everybody's taught that this statement right here is the Tetragrammaton. This is what they said is the Tetragrammaton. This is what was told me. You'll hear that. You'll read it everywhere in ancient material. But what is the difference in this and this? What is the difference in these two glyphs? And of course, you can see that there are some differences in these glyphs. For instance, this is not in this glyph. This symbol always is a symbol that what we would call number 1, or we would call it God, or we can call it spirit, or we can call it essence, or we can call it source, or we can call it power. This glyph is abbreviated for that glyph. And you'll see this glyph translated in the New Testament a lot as God. It's the Hebrew El. You see it on the beginning, Elohim, Aleph Lamid. So reading these symbols and these glyphs, we begin to get a clearer picture. So if I'm calling this the Tetragrammaton, I'm not calling it that. I'm saying that this is what the Tetragrammaton has been called. This glip right here is a symbol for humankind. This is a symbol for the physical body. This is a symbol right here for this structure as it has been designed and put together. It's like the intelligence that's in the sperm and the egg, when they come together, when they commingle, the intelligence that's in them is divine. It's not natural. It's like that intelligence built you in the womb of your mama.
So are you saying that we are Jehovah?
Yes, I'm saying you are this, and I'm saying you are this. I'm saying this right here represents this 3.5 aspect of your being, and I'm saying this right here represents this 3.5 aspect of your being. I'm saying that the merging of these two, I'll show you this. That's why they're sandwiched together. That's why they're used in the fashions they're used in the Old Testament. But you have to learn to read it by the glyphs, by the signs, by how each one of them, what it means and how it's put together. To understand 5 is to understand the womb of a woman. The womb of a woman is an incubator to grow something. That's what it's designed for, that purpose. That's what this glyph represents. So if I take this and I deposit it in here, I take the timeless and I deposit it here in time, it's going to grow something.
And add the positive and negative
And
to
then
it.
when I add this right here, this deals with physicality, but the only reason physicality is what physicality is because this deposited itself in it. Because when I look at this, I have this in here. Do you see what I'm saying? All you got to do is take that away. It's the most phenomenal system. When you begin to see it, everything starts to come alive. This glyph right here deals with male or physical resurrection, male sperm, male productivity, etc., male ability. So this is an earthen vessel dealing mostly with the earthen aspect of the physical being. It's like, where is that? Where is that? Man, I didn't bring that book. I wanted, there's a book, another book I wish I'd have brought. He talks about the covenant that God cut between the 10 toes. And you've probably never heard this. And the reason you haven't is you just haven't read some of the stories of the mythology. The covenant between the 10 toes and the covenant between the 10 fingers. The covenant between the 10 toes is the circumcision of the male penis. The covenant between the 10 fingers is the circumcision of the tongue. When you're reading the Old Testament, you read about both of those. So you're not talking about an old and a new covenant. You're talking about a covenant God cut with the physical, the flesh, and a covenant God cut with the spiritual, the upper.
What do you mean the tongue?
The circumcision of the tongue, simply the covenant between the 10 fingers is the circumcision of the tongue. The tongue is just like the penis, it sows seeds. How does the tongue sow seeds? By words. Words are seeds. What did we just read there in Matthew 13? Jesus said, I'll explain to you the parable of the sower. One of the most profound parables in the New Testament. What is it dealing with? The covenant of the tongue between the 10 fingers, 5 on each side. So that when you go back and you begin to lay open what you and I have been taught to call the 10 commandments. 5 over here and 5 over here. And if you'll look at the wings on the caduceus, that's exactly how many feathers it will have. 5 feathers on each wing. What's it representing? The 5 fingers. The covenant with the tongue. So that your words are circumcised by the Spirit. So that they speak life and not death. Can they speak both? They can and they do. So see, to understand these two glyphs, which next week we'll just dig into these two alone to try to dig into the depth of how these are constructed and how they're put together. How does this one coincide with Elohim and Ahe? That's how you would say Ahe. What that says, I am that. Ahe Asher. In Hebrew, that's what that says. It's a profound glyph. Profound. And then what does he back away? And he begins to see a bush that not consumed, but burns. So we'll see why. All this being symbolic. All this being mythological. All this being allegory. It happens with this figure right here. Here's what we call that. Now, that's called what? Sine wave. What's a sine wave do? It produces time. But if I take the sine wave and I warp it, I bring it right back to infinity. Because this is what happens. You start with this sine wave and you complete a year. That's where we get this right here.
Yeah, it just gives more questions,
Good. Basically, that's what it's designed to do. Because out of the plethora of questions comes answers. How can you ever get a real answer unless there is a really deep question? So, what Spirit wants to do is prod us, stir us to ask the questions.
Well, that was not a working outlet.
That means his phone was not being charged. When it's not a working outlet, it's not plugging him, it's not charging him up. Did y'all get all of that? Kurt, did you get it?
Sure. Yeah, we got
Okay. So what we'll do next week, we'll come back and we will dig with Echa and Yodha, or Jehovah. Yod-He-Vav-He. You have to know, and I know you know, this is probably the most controversial glyph in the Old Testament scriptures. Because this one is seen a lot, but not really known.
Now, I was looking at the yod as being positive and negative.
It is. The yod is positive and negative.
Okay, that's what's funny.
But you see, paradigms automatically thinks negative is bad. Do you think your womb is a bad thing? And you say, absolutely not. You know, I don't think of that. But it's hard for us to think negative or grounding as a bad thing. If I take this glyph, Yod-He-Vav-He, and I begin to look at it, it has a base element that's not even mentioned in it. That base element is earth. And what is earth? It's carbon. It's a carbon base. So carbon is not even mentioned here. But hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen are mentioned. So when you take hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, and you merge them with carbon, you know what you're going to have? Material reality. And when you and I begin to see this glyph as that and realize well, back to the questions that Austin is asking are good questions, need to be asked, because the Ein Sof is hardly ever discussed unless you read ancient material. And if you read ancient material and you kind of read about the Ein Sof and you wonder, well, what is the Ein Sof? Well, it's nothing. And so it's hard to put nothing in your processes and start to think, but when you start to think that everything that is something actually came from nothing. And when you say, but how could it as nothing? The best way to say nothing is to do it this way, and to say that this is no thing instead of nothing. It is no thing simply because it's everything.
No certain thing, it's everything.
Exactly. It's not just any certain thing. It is everything. How are you going to talk about everything? By saying nothing. That's complicated. I realize it is until you begin to think about these things. Then what happens is you have a paradigm shift. And if you do have a paradigm shift, then it's not uncommon. Terminologies that are uncommon are we get stuck on.
It says in there, I am that, I am. So that's telling me there's nothing that God isn't.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So if it says that, and then all of a sudden it flames up in a burning bush, it says, I'm that. And all of a sudden it turns around and there's a ram. I want you to notice this. Again, these are always in front of us. It says, I am a lamb. I am a ram. It always is dealing with timeless in time. Timeless. Am time. Coming back to the glyphs.
Yeah.
And you can't, when you and I both begin to say, I am. That's a contradictory term. I'm timeless and I'm time. Yeah.
It's like being so far out, you're in again.
There you go.